Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm, and you are watching fourth part of What If Naruto Became Dual Half Breed. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
One man sat on a throne in a dark labyrinth that would make the average shinobi piss in his pants, looking over what appeared to be paperwork. You could tell he wasn't happy about it because he kept his fingers from making the seals to destroy the never-ending stack of papers. He knew running a technical village was difficult work, but he never imagined it would be this difficult. Seriously, he was hoping that someone, anything, would come up and disturb him right now so that he could be distracted from the plague in front of him. He didn't have to wait long because a knock came on the door. Orochimaru beckoned the person at the door to come in, assuming his normal, cool, collected, and evil-like posture. The door slid open quickly, revealing that no one was present, or so it appeared. The snake Sanin sighed, knowing exactly who it was, and waited for the door to close before hurling a kunai at the intangible being. Okay, Jiraiya, now that you're here, can we go over this plan so we know what's going on? As the air shimmered around the said person, the kunai was easily caught, and Jiraiya appeared and began to twirl around the kunai. Just a second. We must await Munheim. He couldn't finish his sentence because he was slammed into the wall by a fist. Orochimaru winced in pain as he heard a few dozen bones crack and was certain that a few brain cells had been destroyed. He didn't have any left, or at least didn't think he did. He shook his head and looked over at Jiraiya's crumpled form. Tsunade has already arrived, as we have been expecting you. A muffled groan of agony that sounded like, "Why didn't you tell me?" could be heard as Jiraiya attempted to pick himself up. Orochimaru sighed as he wished Tsunade had pointed him at his paperwork, but Jiraiya jumped back up without a scratch. No matter how many times he saw it, it never stopped surprising him because no one should be able to take that kind of damage and still get up. It was also annoying because the pervert didn't tell him how he did it so he could duplicate the feat. Jiraiya sighed and walked over to where Tsunade and Orochimaru were standing, sitting before pulling out a scroll and laying it out on the desk. Let's get started now that we're all here. These are the new blueprints for Konoha's fortified wall that the council has created, along with the guard shifts and positioning during the Chunin exam finals, Orochimaru. As you can see, it is poorly fortified because the council is too arrogant and believes no one will attempt to attack Konoha. Orochimaru nodded, looking over at the scroll and seeing that Jiraiya was telling the truth. It was so difficult to defend that even the weaker shinobi nations could catch Konoha off guard and severely cripple them. Even though he knew the elders and council members were cocky, backstabbing sons of bitches, this was pitiful for them. Something was wrong, and he wanted to know what it was. Yes, it's poorly defended, but there must be a reason for that. As Tsunade spoke up, Jiraiya nodded, knowing exactly why. It's because the majority of the Anbu refuse to defend their hometown until the council relinquishes its hold on power and elects a new Hokage, preferably Jiraiya or myself. But it appears that they are not giving up and are now attempting to arrest their own Anbu members. As the Anbu is a special forces unit, it is not working very well. Hearing this, Orochimaru could only sigh and interlock his fingers as he looked at both of his teammates. So the internal conflict is still going on. That begs the question of why they would be willing to hold a Chunin exam if their village is in such disarray. If they try to prove they are still strong, they will only weaken themselves further and invite other nations to attack them in order to claim they defeated the invincible Konoha. He sighed deeply and shook his head before turning to face Tsunade. How are things going with Kimimaro? He's resting right now, with Kabuto and Shizune keeping an eye on him. I've done everything I could, but it will take a month for him to fully recover. So you'll have to wait until then to possess and control his body. I'm really curious where you find such talented kids with practically no morals. Is it a natural talent or do you have to work for it? Orochimaru growled at her and turned away from her, his gaze fixed on Jiraiya. So, how many people have you persuaded to join us in reclaiming Konoha's lost glory? And did Rayne accept my proposal? Aside from the majority of the Anbu siding with us, I've only persuaded a few that I knew would join us. I'd tell you their names, but it's best if they remain anonymous for the time being. And, of course, Rayne agreed. They can use any assistance they can get to find and recover Beliar's scattered body before Akatsuki. So they'll be here soon, but don't be too gentle with them or you might lose a few limbs. Orochimaru nodded, a small smirk on his lips. That's encouraging. I guess you two better flee before they catch her, or Konoha will suspect something. Oh, and Tsunade, could you please forward this paperwork to Jiraiya? I believe he was spying on you last night. Jiraiya flew through the paperwork in the wall in an instant as Tsunade pursued him, intending to kill the pervert once and for all. Seeing that all of his paperwork had been destroyed, Orochimaru rested his feet on his broken desk and sat back in his throne, relieved that he no longer had to worry about his only complaint about running this new village. That, and the fact that he'd have to repair the walls Jiraiya had punctured later. Why are we coming all the way out here, Itachi? I know Rayne said we had an important deal to make here, but she didn't tell us what it was. Yugito inquired as she surveyed the dark forest, which she despised. Of course, it was better than the forest around the mansion because no turned would appear and try to eat them, but it was still creepy. Itachi turned to Naruto, Yugito, and Gaara, sighing in frustration because he already knew what was going on but was told to keep it a secret from them. As she stated, this is a critical transaction in order for us to locate more of Beliar's body parts. Stop asking questions because I don't know anything more than you do. When Itachi said that, Naruto raised an eyebrow because he could smell something off about Itachi's scent, but shrugged it off because he didn't know what it was. Shaking it off, he looked over at Gaara, who was walking calmly beside him. Gaara began to change after his seal was repaired, after a few beatings and words from Naruto. Sure, he changed gradually, but he did. Gaara remained a bloodthirsty, psychotic killer even after Shukaku was barred from influencing his mind. Of course, he still had that part in him. He just showed it when he was angry. But, after realizing that Naruto and Yugito were once like him and lived similar lives, he gradually began to accept them and the others around him. He didn't say much, but that was to be expected given his antisocial personality. Something had to be wrong or going on if he said more than 5 words in a sentence. He was also loyal, and in the case of Yugito, extremely loyal, to those he considered friends. Something about Kyuubi and Nibi bothered him, so he did his best to avoid them, though he wasn't sure if it was his Tanuki instinct or Shukaku. He turned away from Gaara and looked at Yugito. She was almost exactly the same as when he rescued her 3 years ago, except she appeared to be a year or two older and half a foot taller. But there was one significant difference beneath the cloak she was wearing. She wore a fluffy blonde furred tail around her waist. She was terrified when it first appeared because she already had cat ears. It took Rayne, Kyuubi, Gobi, and himself to calm her down, while Nibi laughed her off and Itachi looked amused by the situation. They weren't the only ones who changed. Naruto had physically grown taller, more muscular and, strangely, more flexible over the 2 years, but this was most likely due to his vampiric ancestry. He wasn't particularly tall, standing only an inch taller than 5 feet, and his muscles were compact and hardened, making it difficult to tell he even had muscles if you didn't look at him for a few moments. His hair had grown out like his father's, except much spikier and with red streaks along with blue streaks that he dyed in memory of his mother. He was still hurt by her death and Rayne's deception, but he no longer held it against her. He wished there was a way to change what had happened so that he could have both of his mothers present. Shaking that off, there were a few other noticeable changes about him. A blue star appeared in the center of his brow. It was a seal made by both Jiraiya and himself to seal away his dark side while also allowing him some freedoms to increase Naruto's strength in dire situations, as Dark had stated that Naruto's death meant his own and that he would do everything in his power to prevent that. Though it was hell getting him trapped in the seal because his mind provided numerous escape routes that kept him from being sealed away. He shook his head and rolled his eyes as he looked around at the sun. He'd finally gotten used to it enough that he didn't need a cloak when he went outside during the day. This alone increased his tan, so he wasn't as pale as he had been, but he was still far from normal. His final transformation was that his eyes had turned crystal blue. He discovered he could change the color of his eyes at will over the last 2 years. It didn't do anything except make him harder to identify, but it was still cool that he could change it to his Inu red and emerald, his father's electric blues, his mother's icy blues, Rayne's emeralds, and finally Kyuubi's crimson eyes. Of course, he usually chose blues to pay tribute to his birth father and mother. Sniffing the air, he turned around and began walking in the opposite direction, leaving Itachi, Gaara, and Yugito puzzled. He shook his head at them, sighing lightly. It's over here because there's a strong human scent in this direction. If you keep going over there, you'll end up in the land of fire. Itachi blinked for a few seconds before sighing loudly through his nose. He despised it when Naruto was correct and when he forgot how good his nose was. He followed Naruto, shaking his head, as he led them to what appeared to be an underground entrance shaped like a temple door. Looking at the insignia on the door, Itachi nodded, knowing this was the right place, and did what he always did in a hurry. He slammed the door shut. The 2 former Jinchuriki sighed angrily at him, and Gaara mentally did the same as guards swarmed onto the scene. The first people I saw were a red-haired girl around Yugito's age and 3 badly beaten-up genins. What the fuck is going on? Who the hell are you jerks? That's irrelevant. You'll have to pay for breaking in. That's all, to Yuya-chan. These are the guesses that Orochimaru-sama was looking for. A voice called out from behind the 4 of them. All 4 turned around to see a teen not much older than them with silver hair, glasses that seemed a little too big for him, a purple outfit that seemed to suit him perfectly, and a calm, kind face with an evil glint in his eyes. The said redhead, who happened to Yuya, growled lightly before bowing half-heartedly to him. Okay, you perverted bastard. But don't expect me to be gentle with them the next time this happens. And if I catch you peeping on both Kin and me again, I'll castrate your fucking balls and serve them to you on a silver platter. Kabuto gave her a light chuckle and shook his head, knowing she was dead serious. I wouldn't dream of it, to Yuya-chan, but picking a fight with them would be foolish because they are clearly superior to you. So hurry up and let me take them to Orochimaru-sama. Yuya let out a light growl before shoving the 3 unfortunate genin in front of her, as she needed some stress relief even more than usual. When Kabuto noticed Itachi standing at the entrance with a half-annoyed, half-stoic expression, he chucked at her before shaking his head. She has no manners, so please accept my apologies. Please stay with me. Itachi nodded lightly and followed Kabuto through the maze of darkness, with Naruto, Gaara, and Yugito in awe. Even though he didn't want to, Naruto was the first to remember who Orochimaru was because he had read some Konoha history books. So his main question was why Rayne would agree to a deal with a clearly cold-hearted traitor. He couldn't figure it out because it didn't make sense unless Orochimaru had something they needed. But why not just take it from him without making a deal? Was the man more than what he had read? Itachi already knew the answers to all but one of Naruto's questions as they flooded his mind. Why did Orochimaru betray the village instead of simply leaving, as Jiraiya and Tsunade did while remaining loyal to Konoha? He knew Jiraiya and Tsunade had done everything they could to restore order to the village, but they had given up and were plotting something with Orochimaru. He was fuzzy on the details, but he guessed it was something to depose the council and retake control of Konoha. That didn't mean he could return home because he had murdered a few shinobi before leaving. Even if it was in self-defense, he killed them without informing the Sandaime. They arrived at what appeared to be the most elaborate door, with an 8-headed and tailed snake engraved on it, shaking that thought out of his head. He couldn't help but shake his head as Orochimaru decided to make that his emblem. Kabuto opened the door and motioned the 4 of them in, sighing lightly. All 4 did so cautiously, as Orochimaru had a habit of surprising and scaring people just for fun. The room went pitch black as the door closed, and all visibility was lost. It didn't matter. All 4 had ways of seeing in the dark without their eyes, some better than others. Torches along the walls lit up as they were about to use them, allowing them to see the pale man sitting on his throne. Ku. Welcome to my den. Please make yourself at ease. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the raspy voice, but knew he couldn't do anything because Rayne had told him not to. Needless to say, he wasn't the only one who wasn't happy with what was going on. Itachi was the first to do as he said, shaking his head lightly and leaning against the wall before turning to face the snake Sannin. Alright, what is this deal you and Rayne have agreed on, because I believe all 4 of us should know since we are here as part of it? Orochimaru sat back up and leaned against his desk, nodding lightly. It's very simple. I agreed to lend her my shinobi and services to help you fight Akatsuki and find all of Beliar's scattered body parts, and I've already found 2 on my own. But in exchange, I'd like your assistance in regaining control of Konoha and restoring it to its former glory. I already have Jiraiya and Tsunade on my side, as well as its own Anbu, but I doubt Konoha will give in so easily. As a result, I need you to go in and persuade as many of the younger generation as possible to join our cause. Itachi nodded, already knowing what was going on, before turning to face Naruto and the other 2. He knew Naruto was still undecided about what to do about Konoha now that Sarutobi had died. Naruto resented the council for putting him through hell for the first 5 years of his life and murdering one of the few people in Konoha who actually cared about him. That alone made him want to exact his vengeance on the council. He now had a more personal motivation. He would have grown up with his mother if it hadn't been for them. So Itachi wasn't surprised to see Naruto nod in agreement, quickly followed by Yugito and Gaara. A small smirk appeared on Orochimaru's face as he saw this before nodding and pulling out a case and placing it on his desk. These are the 2 bones of Beliar that I discovered. It's one of his ribs and a femur. As you were already aware, handling them is extremely dangerous because they will immediately attempt to replace the exact same body part on you if you do not use protective equipment. Consider them payment to ensure that I'm not just taking advantage of you. Throwing the case at Itachi, the said Uchiha caught it, looked inside, and nodded before sealing it into a scroll. He returned his attention to the snake Sannin because he had a few questions for Naruto to clarify what was going on and knew Naruto had a few of his own. Orochimaru, noticing both of their expressions, realized he needed to explain a few things because Naruto was the first to speak. How exactly did you betray Konoha and seek our assistance? Orochimaru sighed and leaned back in his throne chair, assuming he would ask the question. The answer to the first question is also the answer to the second question. Sarutobi-sensei and Minato-kun both planned my betrayal. They both knew Konoha's roots were rotting, so they needed someone from outside the village to try to create a new Konoha if it became necessary. So they chose me as the best candidate for the job because I was the least liked of the Sannin and everyone expected me to do something illegal. Even though I was, Sarutobi-sensei and Minato-kun had legalized it for me after one of Danzo's men poisoned me during Minato's inauguration party as Hokage. So we both devised a method to help me survive the poison, as Tsunade was unable to remove it. The end result was my immortality jutsu, but there was a catch. As my body begins to fail me, I must change at least every 3 to 5 years. After I used it, the council learned about it and ordered my execution. So Minato-kun assigned me one last mission, to create a new Konoha and seek out and join a group known as Akatsuki to learn more about their plans. 3 months later, Kyuubi attacked Konoha in response to Pain and Madara's plan to eliminate all threats, including Minato. I tried to warn him, but it was too late. You had been sacrificed to protect the village. But, before he did so, he left me a scroll outlining his intentions for Sarutobi. When the council forced Akira out of Konoha, he gave it to her and told her to join Akatsuki for spying purposes, as I was. She had brought me the scroll, which instructed me to carry out the plans for a new Konoha or to root out the bad roots of the existing Konoha. I began building this village while still a member of Akatsuki, but I quickly realized that I'd never be able to build my own because I was too heavily hunted for my Sannin status. So Akira came up with the idea for me to leave Akatsuki so I could gather an army to do what I needed to do. Akira told me to go to Konoha and take you to my village as it was preferable to your treatment in Konoha right before I left and purposefully failed to possess Fugoku once he joined. After that, well, everything is self-explanatory because you're all here. The only thing else you need to know is that Jiraiya, Tsunade, and I have decided it is time to pull out Konoha's bad roots. And we're going to do it during the Chunin exams, which is why I need you. I can't just march into Konoha without some sort of disguise. Because you three are of the appropriate age to be genin, I want you to pretend to be from my village and try to persuade the Konoha genin to join us. Now, I understand that they are only genin, but the majority of the targets I want you to target are council members' children. If they discover that their children have turned against them, they may realize the error of their ways. Orochimaru finished without a hitch. He was surprised because he expected someone to interrupt him, but he had forgotten that the only people who were paying attention were Naruto and Itachi. Sure, the blonde and redhead were, but they weren't as interested because they were only there because Rayne told them to. He noticed Naruto nodding lightly as he took in everything he had said before turning to look at him, his eyes turning to his Inu emerald in red. So the council also forced you out, and Tu-san and Ojiji gave you those orders. Along with Ka-san. Orochimaru returned Naruto's gaze with a nod. Then everything is settled. When do the exams begin? Orochimaru's slippers grew a small smirk as he let out a soft, dark chuckle, as it was in his character to sound evil. He reached into his desk, retrieved 3 Hitai Atesh, and hurled them at them. So there you have it. You'll be leaving tomorrow with my other team, escorted by Itachi and me in disguise. And you'll all be using your real names. Even you, Naruto, if only to irritate the council and incite further conflict between them and the Anbu. Kabuto will show you to your overnight accommodations. Oh, and could you please knock your roommates down a notch for me? They've become quite annoying in their belief that they're unbeatable.
All three nodded as they exited the room, except Itachi, who remained because Orochimaru still wanted to talk to him. Orochimaru had turned to him after they had left.
There's a reason I'm bringing you there, Itachi. It's due to your brother. Itachi's ears perked up, but he narrowed when he saw Orochimaru's face. Jiraiya, from what I've heard, has almost been turned into a weapon for Konoha. His skill was already on par with Junin's, if not higher, and he had almost no feelings of his own. The only thing that drives him is his desire for vengeance against your father and to find and kill you on their orders, but he refuses to listen to them. Then what do you require of me? Itachi asked in a monotone voice, barely managing to keep his anger from entering his voice. Of course, Orochimaru was a Sannin for a reason, and he sensed it despite his near-perfect concealment. I need you to try to persuade him to join us because he has no loyalty to Konoha. He might be willing to leave if he sees you. If not, I'll have to affix a curse seal to him. Is that appropriate? Itachi nodded lightly after a few moments of thought as he looked over at the snake Sanin. Yes, if necessary. I will not let my Otudo be used as a weapon.
Orochimaru nodded and pulled out another scroll, which he tossed at Itachi, who easily caught.
That will serve as your disguise for tomorrow. Your room is right outside mine because it's the only one I could spare in addition to the 3 I gave them. So I'll drive you there because it had to be a long walk. With that, Orochimaru stood up and left, closely followed by Itachi, who now had his own reason to strike back at Konoha. Kabuto quickly led them to the dojo after showing them their rooms because he had heard Orochimaru's request and was sick of them disobeying him every time he gave them orders. When they entered the dojo, Kabuto quickly summoned the 4. To say they were bizarre would be an understatement. Kyuubi, the redhead girl they met at the entrance, and the large guy with burnt orange hair had to be the most normal of them. The other 2 were unlike any other humans they had ever met. The spider-like guy terrified Naruto, while the 2-headed guy made Yugito sick to her stomach because he was so revolting. Hey, you perverted fuck. Why have you brought these 3 jerks here? Kyuubi yelled at Kabuto once more. The big guy gave her a reprimanding look. You know, ladies shouldn't. Oh, fat ass, shove it. She cut him off with a disapproving look. Then again, she didn't seem to like anyone. Kabuto rolled his eyes as he resisted the urge to surgically remove her voice box in order for her to stop cussing worse than any other sailor he'd ever met. The reason is straightforward. Orochimaru-sama wants you to put them to the test. If you don't want to, go to him directly and complain. I guarantee he won't be half as polite as I will. All 4 of them flinched before smirking. They hadn't spent enough time outside to relieve their boredom and stress. So this would be an excellent way to alleviate it. As he turned to face Kabuto, the one with 2 heads smirked. Are we permitted to kill them? Kabuto only chuckled as he turned to face Naruto, Gaara, and Yugito. Take it easy on them. I don't want to be here for too long to heal them. I have to leave tonight in order to return to my espionage mission in Konoha. The 4 twitched in annoyance as Naruto nodded lightly and Kabuto moved out of the way. That fucker doesn't think we can beat these jerks. I'll show that perverted bastard that we can. Oh, that's all. I'm going to rip these guys apart from within. Nobody believes me. Why do I get the impression Kabuto was telling them to be gentle with us for our own safety? Oh, that's it, I'm definitely going to. Ooh, a fly. After a brief pause while Kitamura chased a fly, much to the chagrin of everyone present, the 4 were ready to battle as Naruto, Gaara, and Yugito appeared bored, despite the fact that the fly chasing was quite amusing. This irritated everyone except Jirubo even more as Kitamura attacked them with the intent to kill. Yugito appeared in front of him and backhanded the Spider-Man into the wall, creating a large crater as a knocked-out Kitamura fell out of the crater. As sand began to pour out of Gaara's gourd, all 3 of Orochimaru's remaining elite guards' eyes widened. Kyuubi pulled out her flute and began to play, hoping to catch them in one of her more powerful genjutsu and avoid being punched like the stupid spider. When Naruto realized it was a genjutsu, he made eye contact with Gaara, who nodded in agreement as sand rose into the sky like a cloud. When they saw this, they all tried to jump away, only to be kicked into each other by something they could see, and Naruto seemed to vanish for a nanosecond before reappearing where he was. They couldn't figure out what happened, but it didn't matter because sand began to fall from above and tightly wrap around them, immobilizing them. Gaara, seeing this, held out his hand, indicating that the match was over, as if he clenched his hand into a fist. Yugito noticed this and approached them. I'd consider giving up now because no human has ever survived being caught in his sand. She flipped her hood over her head to reveal her cat ears and slanted eyes to emphasize her point. They suddenly realized they had been fighting demons the entire time, and Kabuto had apparently set them up. Orochimaru walked in and lightly shook his head as the door unexpectedly opened. I didn't even make it in time to see the brief beating. Anyway, let them go. I'll deal with them now that they've been humiliated. Naruto nodded and sighed because he hadn't even been tested. He doubted that anyone stronger than Gobi could truly challenge him if he went all out, but he didn't want to use that form because it was extremely difficult to substance. He was on Itachi's level without it, though the prodigal Uchiha refused to admit it, claiming he was only going half speed during their mock battles.
He questioned it because Itachi had to use the Mangekyo and even Amaterasu on a few occasions.
Of course, the spar ended with Rayne thrashing him for using that in a friendly spar. No worries. If that's all, I'm exhausted from the amount of training I've done over the last few months. Orochimaru nodded as Naruto walked away from his room, Gaara and Yugito close behind. Orochimaru smirked as they walked away, looking over to his battered elite guard. Oh, he knew Konoha and Akatsuki were doomed now. Outside the room, Naruto sighed and stretched out, looking over at Yugito and smiling lightly. He'd developed a slight crush on her over the last 2 years for some reason. Gobi, of course, tried to beat it out of him when she realized it was there, but it was futile. In fact, all it did was encourage her to spend more time with Naruto, as she possessed the best natural talent for healing of any of them. Shaking that thought from his mind, he turned to his room as Gaara entered his, then back to her just as she entered her. Hello, Yugito. She turned over to Naruto with a light smile before yawning loudly as she was pulled out of training before they headed here. When Naruto noticed this, he decided to speak quickly so she could get some sleep. I was wondering if I could show you around Konoha when we get there.
She blinked a few times at his strange request, her eyes widened mentally, and she blushed as she realized he was asking her out.
Shaking that thought off because she knew he didn't come expecting it to be like that, but still. Sure thing, Naruto. That would be ideal.
Naruto smiled at her and nodded.
Okay, I'll do it, Neko-chan. Get some rest now. Yugito blushed at the name, which he had created himself. It was originally intended to be a cute, annoying name for him to call her, but she now likes it for some reason. I will. Night. Naruto nodded as they entered their respective rooms, both with light smiles on their faces. Gaara shook his head from within his room as the Sanai outside dissolved. He wished they would just say it and be done with it. He was so fed up with them that he was ready to lock them in one of his sand spheres and keep them there until they admitted it. Gaara saw the bed and dove into it, sighing and shaking his head, as sleeping had become a hobby for him since he could go to sleep. So, what's the deal with you three joining us? Orochimaru-sama had only assigned us to the Chunin exams, I thought. Asked the black-haired girl, who was dressed in an Oto Kunoichi uniform with a purple ribbon tied behind her hair. Yugito lightly shook her head as she turned to the girl, a slight smile on her face because she finally had a girl her age to talk to. But before she could respond, she looked over at the disguised Orochimaru and Itachi, who nodded that she could tell her. When she realized this, she returned to Kin and replied. Well, Orochimaru made our caretaker and trainer an offer she couldn't refuse, and all he asked in return was that we assist with the upcoming invasion in any way we can, which happens to be quite a lot. Kin nodded to the cat-eared girl, who was persuaded to remove her hood because they would need visual ID anyway, and there was no point in hiding the ears because they would be revealed sooner or later. Of course, as soon as she showed them to the other group of genin, it was all Kin and Zaku could think about because it was so strange, or in Zaku's opinion, hot. Of course, he stopped staring after threatening glares from Naruto, Kin, and Yugito. That makes sense. I suppose the more assistance, the better. Hey, You didn't beat Tayuya and the Sound 4 yesterday, did you? She continued on, a little more excited, after receiving a nod from the cat Hanyu. Can you then train me during the exam breaks? I swear I'll work hard. Yugito's lips curled slightly as she heard Kin say this. For once, she could be the one torturing. Training someone instead of going through hell with Naruto or Gaara. Both Itachi and Orochimaru kept from laughing out loud as they knew exactly what Yugito was thinking, the latter evilly cackling in his mind while absently wanting to know how they trained, as he was slightly interested knowing that Yugito and Gaara could easily beat him. Naruto wasn't even a contestant because he had already demonstrated his ability to defeat 2 Akatsuki members at the same time and knew he would struggle to repeat the feat. Gaara and Dosu were arguing on the other side of the group about using sound waves to make their brain explode. Sand crushing their body. Damn it, it's exploding. Crushing. Exploding. Over which method of killing their opponent was more effective. Needless to say, neither could persuade the other. Ignoring the two's one-sided fight argument, Naruto and Zaku shook their heads. Naruto sighed lightly as he kept looking down the road, hoping they were close because he wasn't sure he could keep from yelling at the two of them. When we get to Konoha, I swear we'll separate those two so this never happens again. Zaku nodded in agreement, his gaze shifting to Kin and Yugito. Naruto noticed this and felt a wave of jealousy wash over him, and he considered beating him into the ground, but he restrained himself because it wouldn't look good on him. To avoid doing so, he pushed a small amount of his vampiric energy into his blades, causing them to spring into place, and began testing their sharpness by lightly running his finger across them. He had them fold back into place as he sucked his finger to stop the blood flow while enjoying his own taste because a light touch easily cut his finger. Zaku shivered lightly as Kin and Dosu were informed that he was half vampire with sun immunity. Can't you see how much fun that is? It really creeps me out. Naruto smirked as he pulled his finger out of his mouth to stop the bleeding and turned to face Zaku. I might reconsider if you offer me a pint of blood. The blood drained from Zaku's face as he stepped back in fear, joined by Dosu and Kin, as they heard Naruto say this and hoped he was joking. As Yugito rolled her eyes at him, a small smirk appeared on both his and Gaara's lips. Naruto, please stop creeping everyone out. In your pouch, you have an entire scroll filled with package blood. But that stuff is nasty compared to what comes directly from the body. Naruto countered with a bigger grin, forcing the 3 sound genin to back up even further while using Gaara and Yugito as shields. Enough, Naruto. Stop fooling around because we're almost to Konoha. Keep that conversation for the Chunin exams. Itachi spoke sternly, his gaze fixed on Naruto, and he refrained from activating his Sharingan because he was certain they were now within hearing distance of Konoha shinobi. Looking ahead, Naruto noticed the fortified walls of Konoha and nodded, knowing that now was not the time to fool around. He could see that there weren't many people guarding the walls, but those who were had a lot of chakra, leading him to believe that they were all at least Junin-level shinobi. It didn't matter because he was probably an S-class shinobi, and he fought better against stronger opponents than he did against weaker ones because he had a tendency to hold back. When he noticed they had arrived at the gate, he returned his gaze to his mother's blues as what appeared to be an Anbu wearing a mask with Nei on it stopped them. Halt. Explain why you've come to the village. We've come to take the Chunin exams. Both of these teams were sent to compete by my village. To avoid being recognized, Orochimaru spoke in a different tone of voice. The source Anbu examined each of them and nodded lightly, as if he understood. Alright, then, show me your paperwork and that of your genin, and I'll let you through. Naruto winced at this, knowing that they would immediately recognize him and prevent them from entering the village, but part of him wanted it that way so he could piss off the council and the villagers. The disguised Orochimaru handed the paperwork to the Anbu while purposefully putting Naruto's on the bottom, having the same thoughts as his younger counterpart, though he wasn't going to reveal himself. Anbu quickly went through all of the names until he got to the last one, and his eyes narrowed dangerously as he read the last one before turning to Naruto. The demonic being. I hereby sentence you to death for your crimes against Konoha. He quickly pulled out his ninjutsu as Naruto sprung both his blades into position ready to defend himself as the Anbu began to charge, but was abruptly stopped as a tree root wrapped itself around his waist while a snake from above wrapped itself around his neck, baring its fangs and ready to strike at a moment's notice. Suddenly, two regular Anbu appeared, one wearing a dragon mask and the other a snake mask. The dragon-masked one was clearly a male based on his appearance, while the snake was clearly a female based on her bust. As the dragon Anbu spoke, Orochimaru instantly recognized the female as Itachi was the same for the male. If you do, you will spark a war between their village and us. Return your blade and depart. Anbu looked at them both and growled lightly to himself, but he knew he didn't have a choice. As the root Anbu growled at the dragon Anbu, the female Anbu took the papers from them and handed them back to the disguised Orochimaru. This isn't the end. He then hushed away to inform his superiors. Anbu, the dragon, only shook his head, knowing that there would be hell to pay. He turned to face the Auto group and apologized lightly. I sincerely apologize. A large portion of the village has yet to recover from the events of 12 years ago and remains bitter. Naruto nodded, as did the disguised Itachi and Orochimaru, as they had already guessed. But, being Naruto, he spoke up. It wouldn't have made a difference. He couldn't have hurt me even if he tried. Don't you think I'm looking forward to another riot like the one when I was 5 so I can finally pay them back? As Naruto looked over them, both Anbu flinched at the venom in his voice. He said it on purpose, of course, to gauge their reactions and to sniff out how they felt about him, and all he could detect was sadness, sorrow, and anger. He gave Itachi and Orochimaru a quick glance and nodded as he could smell their emotions. They didn't need to be told because they already knew who they were, and they could say the same for them. The dragon Anbu sighed lightly before looking down at Naruto. I'm sorry I couldn't make it that day. Many of us were out on missions that day, and I suspect the council had a hand in it, as if it was planned. Naruto grunted lightly, fully expecting them to do something like that, and was about to say something else when Itachi interrupted him. Is there somewhere we can speak privately, Yamato? Yamato nodded and motioned for them to follow before turning to face the snake Anbu. Guard the gate until they return. If they do, return immediately because they will almost certainly try to arrest you. The female Anbu grinned beneath her mask as she absently fingered a kunai in her pouch. Good, it's been a little boring lately. People have been avoiding me more and more, and I have no one with whom to play or feed Manda. Hearing this, Orochimaru sighed and shook his head at her. Now I understand why he was absent at times and why he didn't ask me for tributes. He looked over at her, shaking his head as he realized he had said that out loud. Reduce the number of times you summon him unless you really need him or offer him food. Others must make use of him. Hello, sensei. Yamato grumbled lightly at her slight disobedience. Anko. You know not to say anything because we could be being watched right now. When they arrive, do not try to confront them. Instead, try to understand. Anko nodded lightly and looked over at her commander with a slight fear, as Yamato was dosing her with concentrated killer intent that drew the attention of the former Jinchurikis and Gaara. He turned towards the disguised Itachi and Orochimaru, seeing that she was now listening. Okay, then, follow me. The rest will have to wait for now, and you can fill in the blanks later. Naruto appeared to be irritated by this, but it didn't seem to bother him as Itachi and Orochimaru quickly followed Yamato. He walked through the gates, shaking his head, but was quickly grabbed by Yugito, who appeared to be staring at him. Change your eyes so it's more difficult to tell who you are. When Naruto noticed Gaara nodding along with her, he refrained from growling at them because he wanted some confrontation. But, seeing the Neko Hanyu's expression, he gave in and switched his gaze to Rayne's emerald. Thank you very much. I didn't want to deal with too many things today. He couldn't help but blink in confusion before remembering what he had told her the day before and nodding lightly. Okay, then. I suppose I'll show you around. At least, that's how I remember it. It could have changed. Kin approached Yugito and looked him in the eyes when he heard this. Please excuse me. Given that we will all be here for some time, I believe it is only proper that we get to know the village better. As they stood behind Yugito, the others nodded with her. Both former vessels mentally grumbled at this, as they were looking forward to some alone time without being watched. Naruto returned his attention to the rest of the group after they exchanged glances. Didn't you receive a briefing on the layout? As he responded, Zaku shook his head. Nope. We were only told about the 3 exams because we won't be doing anything important when the time comes. Naruto blinked as he heard this, not knowing what the tests would be because Itachi hadn't told him. Okay, I'll bring you along with us in exchange for knowing what the exams will be. Yugito glared at Naruto as he said this, trying to pierce his skull because she didn't want to bring them along for any reason, and was enraged when all 3 of the sound genin nodded in agreement. She turned around and huffed, lightly gritting her teeth. As he placed his hand on her back, Naruto could only shake his head. I'm sorry, but Gaara would have come with us anyway, and they would have followed us anyway. Yugito sighing and shaking her head, Yugito growled lightly and even louder when Zaku nodded in agreement. Alright. So, what are the exams? The first is a written examination. Most Chunin have fairly basic knowledge, but the purpose of the exam is to test our espionage abilities. The second exercise is a survival test. I'm not sure about the specifics, but we'll be competing against the other teams. The third exam is a tournament against those who pass the second exam, but there may be something before it to reduce the number of genin in it if there are too many of them. Dosu responded in his usual dark monotone tone. So there's nothing to be concerned about. The second exam appears to be the most likely one in which we will be able to recruit anyone. We'll start working on it once we know what the goal is. Yugito and Gaara both nodded in agreement. The Sound 3 were perplexed, but figured it was something Orochimaru or the other guy had asked them to do because they had a job to do in the second exam as well. Alright, I guess I'll start showing you around, but keep in mind that things have most likely changed since my last visit. As they began to follow Naruto, all 5 nodded. They noticed some of the looks they were getting, but the majority of them were confused with a hint of anger because they couldn't recognize Naruto. Yugito was relieved because she had predicted that if Naruto used either of his blue eyes, something bad would happen. Not that they couldn't handle it, but Itachi, Orochimaru, and a severely injured Jiraiya in Otto's hospital wing advised them to stay low. Naruto had shown them around town for about 20 minutes, mostly the major sites. They were about to continue when Naruto's stomach roared loudly. So, I guess that's the end of my little tour. What about we get some food? I thought you were a vampire, and vampires don't eat normal food. They aren't supposed to be able to tolerate daylight. Kin spoke in a thoughtful but slightly perplexed tone. Naruto simply shook his head and chuckled lightly before answering her because he couldn't sense or see anyone nearby with his aura vision. If I were a full-fledged vampire, that would be the case. But because I'm only half-breed, the sun has little effect on me. And, on the plus side, I can eat regular food. All I need is a steady supply of blood, or my vampiric instinct will take over and force me to feed on the closest creature to me. All 3 sound genin flinch at this, none more so than Zaku. Naruto decided to continue after seeing this. I haven't let that happen since I was 6, and I don't intend to start now. I felt like a wild animal with no control over my actions, and I didn't like it one bit. They all calmed down a little because they knew he was going to go crazy on them and try to drain them of all their blood. As she turned to face Naruto, Yugito could only shake her head lightly. Didn't you say there was a restaurant you used to go to all the time because they were always nice to you? Naruto's eyes brightened as he remembered the location as his favorite area in Konoha and hoped they were still there so he could get some ramen. Oh, yes. Ramen from Ichiraku. It offers a variety of flavors, ranging from vegetable to pizza flavored. I'm still curious how they managed to get that flavor so right that it tasted like actual pizza. Before he could go on about the wonders of ramen, which he seemed to be addicted to despite all odds, he heard someone panting and a pitter-patter of footsteps. A young boy wearing ragged clothing, a frail frame, brown hair, and a face that resembled Sarutobi's ran into his thigh and fell straight to the ground with swirly eyes, causing him to turn around lightly. Naruto offered his hand to the young boy instead of laughing at him, probably because he had just run into an iron wall. You should exercise more caution. You might have met someone like Gaara here. If you did it again, he'd probably just threaten to crush you. The young boy paled and looked over at the redhead, nodding lightly as he took Naruto's hand and was helped up. Thank you. Oh, Kami. The pink-haired monster has arrived. Having said that, he hid behind Naruto as a young girl with bright pink hair charged into the area, steaming like a bull. Following her was a boy who appeared to be a year or two her senior, with pitch-black hair, a stoic face, and was currently painting something on a notebook. Naruto couldn't help but notice the young boy's statement and couldn't help but think that if he were in his position, he would have said the same damn thing about the girl. Fortunately, the girl didn't seem stupid enough to keep going when she noticed the 6 of them. As he turned to face the young boy, he could only shake his head. Alright, what did you do to irritate her? I called her a bitch because she treated me like I didn't exist and for labeling me an unlovable outcast after my grandfather died and I was orphaned. The young boy spoke hesitantly. Naruto's eyes narrowed and shifted to his Inu red and emerald, surprising and frightening the young boy as he turned to the pink-haired girl before turning back to him, seeing that he was telling the truth. Is that correct? You had every right to do so. Nobody should make fun of someone for being an orphan. His gaze returned to the girl, who was unnerved by the change in his eye color because it reminded her of her teammate's ability to turn his eyes red. And you should avoid calling people names. Isn't it true that you're a kunoichi? He went on despite her light nod. Then begin to act like one. Shinobi have more important things to do than call young children names. With that, he turned away from her and rested his shoulder on the young boy's shoulder. Come on, people. I was getting ready to treat my team and friends to dinner. The young boy looked ecstatic as he nodded energetically at the thought of food. Naruto smiled lightly at him, while Yugito could only shake her head as the others looked perplexed, with the exception of Gaara, who shrugged his shoulders uncaringly. As they were about to leave, the pink-haired girl took a few steps forward and spoke to them loudly but not yellingly. And why should I pay attention to you? You're not even a Konoha shinobi here solely for the Chunin exams. You have no right to interfere with our business, so go away. Naruto was about to turn around, irritated by the young girl, when Yugito placed her hand on his shoulder and turned around, glaring at the pink-haired girl. And you should keep your affairs separate from ours. He collided with us, so he has every right to seek our protection. Please excuse us while we go. Yugito turned around and began walking away with the others, leaving a fuming Konoha kunoichi behind. She yelled at her without a second thought. Hump. You only say that because your friends are nearby, bitch. I'm sure I could beat you in a one-on-one match. But I'm sure you're only on your team for moral support and to fill a void. Before Yugito could scream, Naruto had vanished from behind the young orphan and appeared right in front of the pink-haired Kunoichi, clutching her throat tightly. Except for Gaara and Yugito, everyone was taken aback by his speed, and the young teen was unable to react in time to stop him as he began to lift her up like a rag doll. She quickly gripped his wrist with both hands, avoiding contact with the blade, and attempted to crush his wrist, but failed. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he realized the pressure on his wrist was much greater than he had anticipated. What the hell is going on? If I didn't know any better, I'd say this girl's strength rivals Yugito's. Damn, they're really turning their children into weapons. Before he could finish his thought, his left arm reached out to his side, grabbed a rock in midair, and crushed it with ease while staring at the girl in his grasp. This is something I'll say only once. If you don't, I'll rip out your heart and eat it in front of your dying eyes. Never insult my teammates or friends. And never, ever insult a child again. If I find out, I will track you down. Understand? He emphasized his point by flashing gold eyes and focusing a massive amount of killer intent on her. Her eyes widened in terror as his murderous intent washed over her. It was unlike anything she had ever felt, even when they had lost their sensei on their way to the wave. It felt like he had complete control over her and would willingly kill her if necessary, and he was making sure she knew it was true from his statement. Not only that, but the air around her seemed to have frozen, and she began shivering and shuddering under the pressure. She couldn't stop herself from crossing her legs as she lost control of her bladder. Naruto flinched in disgust as he let go of her, and she fell to the ground, shaking and shivering as she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. In an instant, the person who threw the rock at him was by her side, revealing raven-colored hair and other features similar to Itachi's. He recognized him as Sasuke in an instant and turned around, not wanting to deal with him right now. Before he could get far enough away, he heard the young Uchiha's icy cold words. That was inappropriate. Who do you believe you are? It could have been, but my point had been made. She should avoid picking fights and making orphans feel unwanted. They are already isolated enough. And in this exam, you will learn who I am, Uchiha, because we will meet sooner or later, and anything you desire is possible. I bid you farewell until then. Naruto spoke in a calm, yet deadly tone, not turning around to meet his gaze, and thus missed the fact that his Sharingan had fully developed. Naruto, Gaara, Yugito, and the Sound Three, along with the orphaned boy, rounded the corner before Sasuke could respond. As he looked down at Sakura, he could only sigh and shake his head. Damn it. As much as I dislike seeing her breakdown, she does need to learn. And I'm curious what he meant when he said, everything I want can come true. Is he aware of my two San and Aniki? As he prepared to pursue them, their newly appointed Chunin sensei jumped into the area. What in the world happened here? The former Kyuubi vessel appears to be impressive. As he raised a bloody kunai, a young man wearing a black cloak with a few red clouds spaced around it spoke. His hair was dark brown, and he had a regal expression on his face. But it was his eyes that drew attention to him, as the whites of his eyes were a dark yellow that was not quite gold, and his pupil was a black, 4-point shuriken with a rather large iris in the center. Yes, but he is not our intended target. What about the Ichibi ship? It came from a young woman dressed in the same cloak as the man. She had dirty blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and a feral expression on her face. As he picked up the dead Konoha shinobi and threw it off the wall and into the forest, the young man could only shake his head. I didn't see anything valuable in him. By appearance alone, he appears to be much stronger than he was 2 years ago. Apart from that, I have nothing. We'll have to wait until the exams start so I can measure him up before we try to capture him. And what about the supposed Beliar piece? The teen Kunoichi inquired as she hurled 2 more bodies off the wall that appeared to be impaled by large spikes. One of the genin attending his exam appears to have one implanted in him. I'm not sure which genin it is or what part it plays, but it is from Kusagakure. Rikamaru, that was all we needed. Let's get out of here for the time being and report to Pain. Ray, show us the way. The young male followed the girl into the wilderness outside of Konoha after she shook her head and jumped off the wall. Did you meet up with Sasuke and the Sandame's grandson today? Itachi spoke in a light tone while sipping his cup of tea, and Naruto nodded. Except for Orochimaru, who was still out, both were sitting at the coffee table while the others were sleeping in their rooms. Apart from pissing off the council today, which we all expected, I can understand why you did it. You put the girl back in line after she stepped out of line. So, how did Sasuke come across? Naruto lightly sipped his tea, shaking his head. We didn't stay long, so we can't say much. He did appear defensive of his teammate, which is a plus given Konoha's apparent attempt to turn the younger generation into weapons. I also told him what he needed to hear so he'd come find me. Itachi raised an eyebrow at him before nodding his head, knowing Naruto would. That's fine with me. You're the best bet to win him over without Orochimaru using the curse seal. So that's what he had in mind for him. I'm not surprised, to be honest. I could see in his eyes that he was becoming unstable, but the same could be said of me. Naruto replied as he sipped the last of his tea. What did Yamato say when you were following him? Itachi pulled out 2 pokey sticks and tossed one to Naruto as he opened his and began to lightly munch on it before responding. Just as Jiraiya and Orochimaru had warned us. Konoha is about to devolve into civil war. While most continue to obey what the council tells them, they are mostly silently rebelling against them. Almost everyone there agreed with Orochimaru's plan, with the exception of being allowed to evacuate a large number of citizens, as some are innocent and do not deserve to be put through this. Naruto huffed as he took a bite from the pokey stick, while Itachi sighed. Naruto, I know you disagree, but some people truly are. Would you like Konohamaru to become entangled in the attack? Naruto shook his head and looked down as he swallowed another pokey. I didn't think so. That is why, when we attack, we will allow some of them to evacuate to safe houses. He took another bite of his pokey and chewed it for a while before pulling out a scroll and rolling it over Naruto's table. Naruto instinctively grabbed it and looked at Itachi, who took another bite of his pokey before answering him. It's a scroll that a certain green freak stole from an old friend's apartment and thought you'd like it because he was one of your godfathers. And don't think about not using it. I know one technique that is very useful in a pinch. Naruto stood up and stretched lightly after finishing the pokey stick Itachi had given him. So, it's time to call it a night because I have to get up in 6 hours. Damn them for scheduling exams during the day. I'm still not used to getting up before it's dark. Itachi agreed, finishing up his stick of pokey before pulling out another. Same here, but you'll get used to it. I have a feeling that a few of the competitors will be worthwhile. And if that doesn't work, you can always fight Gaara and Yugito. Naruto nodded in agreement as he walked over to Itachi's room before coming to a halt. Hello, Itachi. Do you think I'll be able to bring Konohamaru back to the mansion once this is over? The Uchiha recovered quickly after blinking in surprise at Naruto's question before shrugging. If he wants to, but you'll have to get Rayne's approval first, and she won't be here for a few days. Naruto opened his door and slid into the room, nodding as he suspected that was the answer. Naruto was inspecting his blades as dawn approached, preparing them for use later today. He knew they were useless for the first exam, but a little fear tactics never hurt. Besides, he rarely removed them unless he was sleeping or taking a shower. He folded them back and clipped on both bracelets that were attached to the blades, deeming them ready. When he was done with them, he grabbed his weapons pouch, which was full of scrolls, and checked to see if they were all there, because it wouldn't be a good thing if he didn't have any blood to feed on if his urges began. When he saw that everyone was there, he quickly stood up and exited his room, only to find Itachi sitting at the table, as if he hadn't moved at all. He leaned against the wall, shaking his head at the Uchiha, who was eating another stick of Pocky, and waited for the others to get up. "Did you sleep all night eating Pocky, or did you fall asleep sitting there? Don't you want to know?" Itachi's only response as he munched on his favorite stick, seemingly unconcerned about the rest of the world around him. As Yugito stumbled out of her room, mumbling under her breath that it was too early to be waking up for this, Naruto could only shake his head. Hearing her say this, a small smile appeared on his lips, as he completely agreed with her. He caught himself looking at her backside as she stumbled to the coffee pot and quickly turned away, swearing to the deity above that he had not checked her out. Of course, the fact that he swore he caught Itachi with a coy grin on his face didn't help, but it could have been a figment of his imagination as the Uchiha ate his Pocky once more. He took a deep breath to get his hormones out of his system and looked around the room to divert his attention away from Yugito, but with an accidental flick of her tail, his attention was drawn back to her buttocks. Damn it. Will she ever stop doing this? I'm not paying attention to her plumpness. God damn it. Fortunately for him, Gaara appeared at the table in a swirl of sand just as Yugito finished pouring herself a cup of coffee and turned around, diverting his attention away from the wiggling. As a result, she didn't notice Naruto staring at her as she sat across from Gaara at the table. Do you have any ideas on what we're going to do for each exam now that we know about the second? Naruto nodded from his perch against the wall, flexing his clawed hands. Yeah. We take the first exam individually. I know you and Gaara have methods for spying on the disguised Chunin, and I'm confident I can as well. In terms of our survival test in the forest, I would recommend gathering our scrolls as soon as possible, with an extra 2 in case we run into Orochimaru's team. Given the 5-day time limit, I believe we should use it to persuade any Konoha genin to join our cause. Now, if they refuse at any point, Yugito, I want you to wipe their mind, and if you can't, either Gaara or I will take care of it personally. Both nodded in agreement as Itachi finished his stick of Pocky before lightly growling as he reached into his pocket and found none left. He groaned as he dropped the scroll into the Uchiha's hand, outstretching his hand towards Naruto, before grumbling about the seemingly all-knowing Uchiha. As he grumbled, another door opened, and the snake Sannin fell through and crawled towards the coffee pot. Everyone in the room was sweating as he poured himself a cup of coffee and took a few sips of it. I'll never understand how people get up at this ungodly hour without coffee. The Sound Three stumbled and bumbled their way into the room, quickly following him from their rooms. Kin was the only exception, as she had collapsed and was out cold. After a while, all three returned and began eating breakfast that Itachi had prepared because the smell had woken everyone except Naruto, who was already awake by the time he began cooking. After they had finished eating, Zaku yawned loudly, causing Naruto, Itachi, and Yugito to flinch before turning to face them. How come you woke us up so early? The exam doesn't even begin until 10 o'clock. Naruto shook his head, knowing Itachi's reasoning for doing so as he answered for him. It's very simple. The ones who want to pass this exam more than anything else will arrive early, so it is best to arrive first so we can determine who is serious about this exam. This will make us targets for the early risers, but I doubt you'll have to worry too much about it. There may be some that cause you problems, so take these. He finished by tossing 3 kunai with triple blades adorned with kanji and seals. Orochimaru's eyes widened in surprise, and his 3 genin looked at Naruto in perplexity. Naruto was about to respond when Orochimaru interrupted him. "Can you use it?" The snake Sanin was scoffed at by the dual half-breed, who nodded his head. "Yes, I can use it without the kunai because it is part of my vampiric bloodline. Father required the kunai to activate his vampiric blood, whereas I only require the kunai to act as markers so I know where to go in case someone is present and requires assistance." Orochimaru's jaw dropped further in awe as he looked at Naruto with more respect, realizing why he was a viable threat to Akatsuki. As he stretched out, Naruto smirked even more. "And, to be honest, I don't use it anymore. There are much faster methods, one of which I am familiar with. And the fact that Kyuubi and Rayne can outrun me while using it renders it obsolete." Orochimaru's jaw dropped to the floor in shock and awe as Naruto and Itachi chuckled at the priceless face of the snake Sanin and were tempted to photograph it to commemorate the moment in history. They both shook that thought out of their heads as one pulled out a stick of Pocky and started munching on it while the other pushed himself off the wall. "Alright, it's time to go. Remember to plant those kunai if you find yourself in a situation you can't get out of." The Sound 3 nodded, not knowing what the kunais did but knowing it was linked to some sort of speed technique that Orochimaru feared and respected. All 5 of them stood up from their seats and followed Naruto out of the hotel room and over to the academy. All but Zaku and Kin noticed they were being followed after a few minutes of walking, but were quickly filled in as Dosu whispered into their ears. When Naruto activated his aura vision, he noticed they were being followed by what appeared to be root anbus on their left and right. There are 3 on the left and 4 on the right. If they are hostile, I'll have to dispatch them quickly without showing off too much because someone appears to be watching. I don't want a bloodbath right now, but if I don't have a choice, I will be forced to. But why can't I see who's looking?" Putting that thought aside for the time being, he narrowed his eyes as a figure from the right jumped down in front of them. The others came to a halt as he turned away and whispered something only they could hear. "Don't do anything if he attacks. This will be handled by me." The root anbu unsheathed his ninjutsu and struck him as he said this. As the anbu came to a halt, Naruto's blade sprang forward before folding back. The Sound 3 were perplexed as to what had happened, but Gaara and Yugito knew right away because the footprints where Naruto was standing were slightly off, indicating that he had moved, and there was blood dripping from the blades. As the man's hands fell off, blood began to seep from his shoulders, gushing a small amount of blood towards Naruto, but not far enough to hit him. The ninjutsu shattered into nearly hundreds of bloody pieces as soon as the arms hit the ground with it in hand. Kin gasped in surprise and shock as the ambu's body shattered into dozens of pieces, spilling blood, bones, and flesh all over the ground. Kin couldn't stand it because it was the most gruesome thing she'd ever seen, so she ran to the side and hurled. Ignoring her for the time being, Naruto turned towards the root anbu, who was gripping their ninjutsu from above. "Unless you wish to become like him, leave now and inform your council that any act of violence towards me from now on is cause for me to retaliate, which will result in death. Now get out." He laced killer intent with his vampiric blood lust and focused it on all 6 of them, and each vanished in an instant, most likely fearing for their lives. Naruto turned to Gaara after they had left. "Put it in the ground." Gaara nodded as his sand flowed from his gourd, sweeping the flesh and bones away and burying them before his sand returned, leaving a bloodstain and a sickening scent where the flesh and bones had been. Yugito walked over to Kin and gently rubbed her back to calm her nerves as Naruto drew a rag from his pouch and wiped the blood from the blade, leaving a little for a fear effect when others noticed there was actual blood on his blades. When Kin was able to move again, they slowly made their way towards the academy, with her giving him the occasional terrified look, knowing what he was capable of. Dosu had nothing but respect for him, killing the man in a brutal manner but quickly enough that he didn't feel it until the very last second. Zaku's fear of him grew as well, but another thought entered his mind that overpowered the fear. That was some kick-ass. I'm relieved he's on our side. They arrived at the academy quickly and noticed that almost no one was there, which Naruto confirmed when he checked it out with his aura vision and discovered that no one was in the building. He shook his head as he turned it off. There is no one inside, so let's go straight to 311 and wait for the others. And why do I have the feeling we're still being watched? Oh no, I'm becoming paranoid. That's probably a good thing, especially in Gaara's case. Because no one was there, they quickly scaled the first 2 floors and entered the designated room for the first exam. Naruto leaned against the wall about 4 to 5 meters from the entrance as the sound genin took the seats directly in front of him. Gaara stood between all of them, off to the side, as Yugito sat at one of the tables. A few minutes had passed when the door opened to reveal Kabuto and 2 of his teammates dressed in Konoha Hitai Atesh. When their gazes met, Naruto and Kabuto nodded as the latter walked over to them. I'm sad for Naruto-san. I figured you'd be here early, so I dragged my fellow spies along. Naruto nodded again as he looked over at Otto's second in command. So, what's the deal, and why are you here? Before responding, Kabuto grinned and pushed his glasses back on his nose. You see, I'm still a genin in Konoha. Naruto and the sound genin raised their eyebrows in surprise, knowing how powerful he was. I know it's shocking, but I purposefully failed every genin test I've taken to make everyone think I'm a pushover. What I'm here for is to get close to Sasuke in case we need to mark him. I'm also here to provide you with information about Konoha's genin. Naruto nodded again, and Kabuto went on. Since they implemented their new genin test, it has become more difficult for anyone to pass, so all the nobodies have been eliminated before they can arrive. However, there are a few you should keep an eye out for and try to persuade to join our cause. Hyuga Hinata is the first. She used to be a timid girl, from what I recall, but now she's ice cold and doesn't seem to have a conscience, which isn't true. She simply hides her frail nature behind this mask to avoid being hurt. Hyuga Hiyashi, a council member, is her father. He was adamant about either killing you as a child or using you as a weapon. He is also the second in command of the council, second only to Danzo in power and influence since the Uchiha clan was wiped out.
She should easily join because she despises her father.
Her team will be a challenge because Aburame Shino and Inuzaku Kiba are unlikely to be persuaded. While the Aburame normally rely on logic, they are particularly obstinate when it comes to Kyuubi and you because you used to hold him. You might be able to persuade him to join our cause, but it's unlikely because he will follow the decisions of his clan and father. The Inuzaku is similar, except that he appears to have been raised and trained specifically for the purpose of tracking you down and killing you. So, if you two meet, he'll most likely be an antithesis to what they believe you're capable of. As I see it, the best thing to do is knock both unconscious and have the former Hyuga clan heiress join us. Her cousin, Hyuga Neji, comes next. He will also be very easy to recruit, and he can even persuade the entire branch house to join us by promising to remove the cage bird from their forehead. While he has no feelings for Hiyashi, the Hyuga head will find it difficult to punish him because he loves his brother too much and is the only thing keeping him from turning the branch house into slaves. His teammates won't be too much a bother because the child modeled after Guy will follow his sensei and the weapon girl's father is already a member of the rebellion. Only leaves convincing him, which shouldn't be too difficult. On Sasuke's team, the only one worth trying is Haruno Sakura, the pink-haired girl you met yesterday. However, she appears to be a hopeless case because her mother has effectively brainwashed her. The other kid isn't worth bothering with. He's a special route Anbu put on the team, and there's no way to convert him. Finally, there is the Ino Shika Cho trio's next generation. I hate to say it, but as long as you can persuade Sasuke, the girl will be the easiest to persuade. The larger boy will be moderately difficult because you must isolate him and be friendly with him. Then there's the group's skinny slacker. While my notes indicate that he is extremely lazy, he is a genius. So he could be extremely easy or extremely difficult to convince. Naruto nodded as the information began to sink in. Well, that's helpful. I think I'll go after the Hyuga heiress first, and then let her convince her cousin in the branch house. I'll just let Pinky rot unless she proves me wrong from yesterday. The trio appears to be the most difficult because I know they will work together and catching them alone will be difficult. When they arrive, I should find out what they like. Wait a minute, the girl likes Sasuke, check 1. Okay, thanks for the information, Kabuto-san. Kabuto nodded and returned to his team, just as other teams began to flood the room. Naruto could only shake his head as almost no one had decided to show up ahead of time. Then again, perhaps no one expects the first test to be particularly significant. He could only scoff at that because most first tests were designed to eliminate as many wantobes as possible from the competition, especially if there was going to be a tournament at the end. Shaking that thought from his mind, he looked around the room, unimpressed by everyone who had entered. He had noticed some of his targets, primarily the two Hyugas and the Ino Shikacho, but it appeared that he wasn't the only one. He'd noticed that the Inuzaku heir, Kiba, had noticed him and was growling along with his small companion. A small smirk crossed his face as he considered a good way to scare at least one of them as he flared a small amount of Yuki so that it went unnoticed by almost everyone except those who were extremely sensitive to it and changed his eyes to his Inu red and emerald before flashing back to the cold blue. The dog began whimpering in fear as it hid behind Kiba's hood, as Kiba looked confused and angry. Naruto smirked and returned his eyes to their electric blues as both Gaara and Yugito looked at him inquisitively. He shrugged uncaringly at them, pointing in the general direction of Kiba, and they both understood. As the clock approached 10 o'clock, Naruto could sense Kabuto's impatience growing as Sasuke appeared to be absent. Sasuke arrived with his two teammates flanking him just minutes before the deadline. In an instant, the blonde-haired Yamanaka was beside the Uchiha, looking at him with hearts in her eyes, while the rest of the rookie Konoha genin rolled their eyes before lightly conversing with one another. Naruto had to hold back his laughter because they were drawing almost all of the attention away from each other. Kabuto approached them while shaking his head, taking his chance. "You rookies, you should be quiet. You're focusing all of the attention on yourself." All of them immediately stopped talking, realizing that their rage and killing intent had drawn almost everyone's attention. As he readjusted his glasses, Kabuto chucked lightly at them. "Don't worry, we were all rookies once. I'm available to answer any questions you have about the exams or the contestants." "Well, why are you still here if you know so much about it?" Kiba spoke firmly while resisting the urge to growl at the white-haired imposter, knowing that he knew nothing about the exam and that any help would be appreciated. Kabuto smirked at the Inuzaku heir before shaking his head and readjusting his glasses because they wouldn't stay on. "I know a lot because I've taken this test 6 times and this is my 7th. And before you think I'm weak, these tests are extremely difficult, and only the best of the best are promoted, and even then, not always." As he pulled out what appeared to be a stack of index cards, his grin grew as he saw their surprised expressions. "These have everything I gathered from the last 6 tests I took, as well as all the genin in this year's test that I got from a friend who checks the backgrounds of everyone who comes into Konoha." Sasuke's attention was drawn in an instant, and he moved to the front of the group, staring Kabuto dead in the eyes. "If that's the case, I'd like to know more about the blonde with the blades." When Kabuto heard this, he smiled almost cruelly and pulled out the first card on the list. My. You must be fascinated by death. I had my friend rank the danger threats from most dangerous to least dangerous." Sakura paled as she looked over at Naruto and rubbed her neck, thankful that he had spared her earlier, while Kiba's eyes narrowed. "Let's see what we've got here. Namikaze Ryu Naruto is the son of Ryu Akira and The Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato, according to his name. Kabuto appeared stunned at the end, but he was simply acting his part. The reaction of the 9 genin, as well as everyone else who was listening in, was shock, including the genuine Auto genin who were glancing at the stoic Naruto as he stared straight ahead. Kiba's rage grew as he refrained from growling out loud because he had been trained by his mother and sister to go by the name, but it would be false. Sasuke, along with the rest of the Konoha genin in the room except Kiba, couldn't believe that the Yondaime's child would be part of another village. Sakura was the first to mention it. Wait. Why is the son of the man who rescued us from Kyuubi in another village and not here? Kabuto shrugged as he examined the card, pretending to be surprised. I'm not sure why he was forced out, but it appears he was. Anyway, other than his mission record, which many Chunin would envy, he's pretty much a mystery. He has 3 S ranks, 17 A ranks, and 6 B ranks. He is thought to be an SS rank threat in Sanagakure and Kumogakure no Sato, as well as the vigilante known as the Vampire. A little known but intriguing fact about the vampire is that he appears to enjoy ripping out his victim's heart and feasting on it in front of their dying eyes. Sakura's face was colorless because he had threatened to do the same to her and was instinctively moving behind Sasuke to use him as a shield if he decided to keep his threat. Everyone, including Kiba, began to fear Naruto after hearing this, and the malevolent energy emanating from him didn't help matters. Sasuke, on the other hand, was unconcerned for the time being and was more concerned with what Naruto had told him. How can he assist me? Wait. Did one of those S-rank missions involve Iniki or Tusan? If so, perhaps he can tell me. When a puff of smoke erupted at the front of the room, it was accompanied by a loud, ominous voice. Stop right now. Everyone fell silent and stopped moving, with the exception of Naruto, who was already walking towards the smoke when he noticed the scarred man with a bandana on his head holding what appeared to be a box filled with small slips of paper. The said man noticed him moving up but ignored him as he continued on. Okay. My name is Morino Ibiki, and today I'll be your first examiner. So everyone comes up, takes a number, and sits in that chair. When Ibiki smirked lightly, everyone slowly stood up, not really sensing any urgency. Oh, yes, if you don't get one in the next 2 minutes and sit down, you fail the test right away. Panic ensued as Naruto handed 5 more slips to Gaara, Yugito, and the Sound 3, who promptly sat down at their assigned chairs.
When his Chunin assistants began passing out sheets of paper to everyone after everyone had been seated and those who had not were thrown out, Ibiki looked over all the potential genin.
Naruto looked over at his 2 neighbors as they did so. On his left was a teen who had to be at least 4 to 5 years his senior and had a higher chakra capacity than the majority of the people in the room, alerting him to the fact that he was most likely one of the undercover Chunin. Putting that thought aside for the moment, he turned to his right and noticed one of his targets, Hyuga Hinata. She was dressed in a loose black shirt with a small opening at the neck that revealed her mesh shirt underneath. Her pants were also black, with taping at the knees and ankles. Her dull lavender eyes, which lacked an iris, were filled with anger, hatred, pain, and sorrow. Her navy blue hair was longer than the photo showed, reaching down to her shoulder blades and being straight with no spikes in the back. Even though she was only 12, her hardened face gave her the appearance of a 15-year-old, if not older. Before he could think any further, Ibiki's voice reached his ear, and he turned to face the scarred Chunin. Okay. Now that everything is in order, I will go over this with you only once. You fail if you ask me or any of my associates. As Ibiki continued, the already silent room became deafeningly silent as people stopped breathing. Okay, here are the rules for the test. Anyone caught breaking them will be punished. My first and most important rule is that if you fail, the entire team fails. If the room wasn't already silent, it was now, as everyone had stopped breathing except for Naruto, Gaara, and Yugito. The second is that you have 45 minutes to complete this test before it stops working. You fail if you do not finish within the time limit.
I'll answer your 10th question once the 45 minutes are up.
Because there are 10 questions, the highest possible score is a 10, so everyone starts with 10 points. You obviously fail if you have no points after grading. The room gradually became louder as people began to breathe out in relief as Ibiki appeared to have stopped talking, only to suddenly hold their breaths once more as he continued. Finally, the last rule for this test. You will lose 2 points if you are caught cheating. If you are caught cheating 3 times, you will be kicked off the team and you will all fail. You are free to begin. Everyone flipped their papers over and began answering the questions in a frenzy of movement. Naruto couldn't help but smirk because he knew the answers, but he wasn't interested in taking the test fairly because there was no challenge in it, not that cheating was much a challenge. Gaara had already used his sand eye to copy a disguised Chunin while Yugito was sitting by the said Chunin, gripping his hand tightly beneath the table, slowly snapping the bones in it as he was forced to give her the answers. He restrained himself from laughing at the scene because that was just her style. Looking down at his test, he shook his head before closing his eyes and focusing on his aura vision, going far beyond what Rayne had taught him. Naruto focused his mind on the Chunin, forcing his spirit and will on the unsuspecting male. Naruto's will took control of his mind and body after a brief and one-sided struggle for control, and began writing the answers down slowly to pass the time while channeling them to Naruto, who in turn began writing them himself. When he was finished, he let go of the Chunin, who looked around the room, perplexed as to what had happened. Still having plenty of time on his hands, he quickly used stop time. The room froze as he stood up and lightly stretched before walking through it, checking on all his targets and ensuring they were getting their answers. He noticed something odd about one of the Kusa genin while walking. Naruto approached him and was surprised to see that his eye was still working despite the fact that the rest of his body was frozen. Looking at the eye more closely, Naruto began to notice key details, similar to Beliar's eye, which replaced Rayne's left eye nearly 400 years ago. He stopped staring as he returned to his seat, pulling out a Walkman CD player and inserting his headpieces before allowing time to restart. Within seconds, everyone was staring at him as he nodded his head to a band from one of Rayne's eras. He ignored their stares and mouthed the words, much to their chagrin and pissing off almost all of the examiners, except for Ibiki, who was biting his lip to keep from laughing at the event as he eliminated a few teams just for looking at him as he purposefully kept his test visible. However, it appeared that one of the Chunin examiners didn't appreciate the distraction and threw a stray kunai towards him, purposefully being slightly off target from the guy cheating behind him. Naruto caught the kunai with his finger instinctively, catching the ring and stopping it from moving any further before twirling it around on his finger while lip-syncing to the song playing. As the Chunin was stunned, Naruto flipped the kunai into the air before catching it again, blade first, and crushing it with ease before tossing it to the guy behind him, knocking the poor kid out. Gaara could only shake his head as he waited for the others to finish, while Yugito mumbled something about showing off as she snapped a few bones in the Chunins to get his attention. Ibiki called time after a few more agonizing minutes, just as Naruto turned off his Walkman. Shaking his head, Ibiki looked around the room before glaring at anyone who had made it this far in the exam, which was nearly 3 times the normal length. But it wouldn't matter because his plan would drastically reduce their numbers. He mentally grinned as he looked around the room one last time before speaking in his usual menacing tone. Okay, maggots, time's up. Everyone began putting down their pencils and looking nervously at the scarred journal, some knowing they had already failed, while others hoped the last question wasn't too difficult and that their teammates wouldn't fail them. Ibiki smirked lightly because he already knew what most people were thinking before quickly covering it up because he didn't want anyone to see it. Good. Before we get to the final question, there are a few ground rules to follow. One of them is that if you complain about it, you will fail. No one spoke as they repressed their rage, not wanting to let them or their teammates down. The first and only requirement for this question is that you leave now if you do not want to take it. Some of the group snickered, as almost everyone there was planning on taking it. But, if you do take it, the first 9 questions mean nothing because this one will make or break you and makes the rest of the test look easy. And if you fail, I will personally bar you from taking another Chunin exam. If you leave, it will not count against you and you will be able to take it again. You will now have 10 minutes to decide whether to stay and risk failing and never becoming a Chunin, or to leave and have a chance to advance at the next possible exams. As the room fell silent, the sound of a few dozen pencils dropping could be heard. Naruto kept from snickering because he knew the man was bluffing, but he was very convincing as he laced a small amount of killer intent with his words and his eyes as he looked around the room. If he had been one of the other genin in the room, he would have been terrified, but he was not one of them and was perfectly normal, so it didn't bother him in the least. As more and more people left with their grumbling and glaring teammates, his mental laughter became louder and more difficult to suppress. When he looked over at Gaara and Yugito, he could tell they were doing well and weren't as fazed as Dosu. Zaku appeared nervous but relieved at the same time, most likely because he bombed the first part and was getting a second chance, but he was nervous because he might never become a Chunin. Looking over at his last teammate, he was surprised to see her twitching and fidgeting in her chair, obviously affected by Ibiki's words and killing intent. He considered using stop time to calm her down, but he could only do so for himself. Another was that he could get up and say something stupid while still giving everyone around him confidence. Finally, as he looked over the departing genin, a wicked idea struck him, and he sprang one of his blades into place and slammed it into the desk in front of him, catching everyone's attention as they looked over towards him. They wished in an instant as the air began to ooze with killer intent from the blonde with red and blue streaks. Will we be able to finish this? I become bored and consider how to murder my examiners and fellow competitors while passing the tests. He finished by pulling his blade from the desk and pulling it back. For a brief moment, nothing happened before he placed his fingers on the side of the desk and pushed in opposite directions, causing the desk to move with him, revealing that he had split it solely through contact. When he looked around the room, he noticed that almost everyone around him was having difficulty breathing, and he sighed out loud as he overdid it with his killing intent and cut it off.
As his gaze landed on Ibiki, he checked back on Kin, who appeared to be recovering as well, but her fear seemed to have left her seeing what Naruto did.
Soon after, another quarter of the room left for various reasons, leaving Ibiki to smirk at Naruto as he helped a teammate while intimidating everyone around him, including himself. Shaking his head, he looked over everyone left with a solemn expression. This is your final opportunity to leave. A few more stood up and left, unable to bear the pressure any longer. Ibiki spoke again after noticing that no one else was leaving and that the door was closing. Okay, everyone in this room. Leave. Congratulations. As he said this, he smiled slightly, and everyone in the room looked perplexed. Shaking his head at them, he decided to answer all of their questions. As many of you should have guessed by now or are about to, this test served 2 purposes. The first is to put your decision-making skills to the test, which is why the rule on the final question exists. Both options are bad, but both have a bright side. Except for one exception, those who chose to continue demonstrated the courage to make decisions Chunin make. Sometimes the decisions lead to death. Even the best of us make mistakes from time to time, but shinobi must be near perfect if they are to survive. The second goal was to put your espionage skills to the test, as it is critical to be able to observe a target without being detected. Make no mistake, some of your attempts were pitiful, but they were good enough. As much as I'd like to continue, your next examiner should arrive soon. She's finally arrived. The door opened as soon as Ibiki said that, revealing a feral-looking woman with long brown hair in a ponytail that reached her back. She had 2 triangle marks on her cheeks, cold, brown eyes that seemed to freeze over anything they looked at, a small bust, and 3 dogs trailing her. "Please welcome your second examiner, Inuzaku Hana." As he looked over at the girl, Naruto's eyes widened as memories of his childhood began to flood him.
His blood boiled hotter and hotter, becoming increasingly difficult to control as his vampiric instincts urged him to drain her dry and his demonic instincts sought vengeance on her for what she had done to him.
To add fuel to the fire, Dark was urging it on while attempting to add his own energy to Naruto. The only thing keeping him from attacking her was his will, and it was fraying. She spoke in a cold and indifferent tone before he could act. "Everyone meet me at 44 training ground in 20 minutes. With that, she turned around and walked out of the room, leaving Naruto steaming as he reined in all his emotions and control over his body as he was about to release his killing intent once more. This time, however, both Gaara and Yugito were by his side, trying to figure out what was going on. Naruto stood up before they could say anything, an aura of malice surrounding him but under control. "Don't even bother. Now, let's get this over with." Gaara and Yugito exchanged puzzled looks before sprinting up to catch him with the sound 3. Naruto was leaning up against a fence in front of a dark forest with a fence around it, while Gaara and Yugito looked at him worriedly with a hint of curiosity. He held back his rage as he repressed all the memories that the female Inuzaku had brought him. He looked both of them dead in the eyes before speaking calmly. "I don't have anything to say and will not say anything. Both of you will learn in time, but now is not the time, so let it go." He spoke forcefully at the end, attempting to put an end to the intrusion into his past. Yugito sighed softly as she looked over at him, shaking her head lightly. "As much as I want to put it aside for the time being, neither of us can. She is obviously having an effect on you, and we need to know what it is so that we can assist you. I understand not telling the other 3, but we're your friends, and we can help you because we've been there." Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly as Gaara nodded in agreement. Neither would stop until he told them, which he didn't want to do. As a result, he turned away from them. Yugito growled at him as Gaara considered whether to use his sand on him to try to pry the information out of him when the dual breed spoke. "Are you sure you want to know?" Yugito nodded and crossed her arms around her chest as Gaara glared at him. "Okay, but instead of telling you, I'll give you something to think about. Most people only hurt me physically, while others tried to break me mentally. She went out of her way to hurt me in every way she could and enjoyed every minute of it. I despise her the most of anyone in this village." Gaara looked mildly stunned as Yugito's blood drained from his face. Yugito looked pityingly at Naruto, but quickly shook it off as she looked at Naruto, thinking of everything that could be done to a 4 to 5-year-old. She shivered lightly at the thought because it was something she couldn't bear thinking about because a child was supposed to be free and innocent, and her childhood wasn't all that bad. She was about to say something about it when others arrived, cutting her off because she had noticed that almost everyone there was focused on them, specifically Naruto. She refrained from growling because most of the girls, excluding the Konoha Kunoichi and Kin, were looking at him in a daze of awe, as was Kin to some extent, though hers was more respect than awe. The others were irritating her because they seemed to be turning into fangirls, and the last thing she needed was more competition when Gobi was already more than enough for her. Putting her jealousy aside, she noticed that he had all of the Konoha Genin's attention on him, owing to what Kabuto had said earlier. Yugito mentally sighed because she hated being the center of attention, but she knew it was coming soon because Orochimaru had told Naruto to use his real name. However, Naruto seemed to be enjoying it, which was strange to her, but she put it aside for the time being because Naruto was difficult to predict and read. Gaara didn't seem to care, which was close to the truth, though he was getting irritated by the fact that they wouldn't stop staring at them. Naruto began tapping his foot in annoyance as he could sense and see all of the proctors preparing everything for the exam, yet they were no closer to completion than they had been 20 minutes before. As soon as he said that, a puff of smoke appeared in front of the majority of the genin, revealing Hana and her 3 dogs. Naruto immediately began to control his emotions and killing intent, knowing that now was not the time. Even so, his blood began to boil, making it more difficult to control and making it even more difficult for him to rein in his growing bloodlust. Unaware of the potential danger posed by Naruto's growing rage, Hana cast a cold gaze over all the genin, only warming up when she saw Kiba and hardening when she saw Naruto. Her gaze returned to its normal cold glare as she looked over the rest of the genin before speaking. Alright, now that you're all here, we can start the second part of the exam, which you'll be taking here in Training Ground 44, also known as the Forest of Death. Except for a few, including Naruto, who smirked in hope that the forest would live up to its name, everyone else paled at the ominous name. You will be tested on your survival skills, as well as teamwork, stealth, fighting prowess, and intelligence gathering. Many raised their eyebrows at this, as they had just been tested on the previous one, but continued to listen as Hana continued with her speech, pulling out a brown and white scroll. From the booths over there, you will be given one of these scrolls. Your mission is to collect the opposite scroll, which means that if you have a heaven scroll, you must obtain an earth scroll and vice versa. But these scrolls will not be lying around in this forest. You must steal them from other teams by any means necessary. The majority of the genin nodded, while a few frowned but continued to listen as she finished her speech and pulled out a stack of papers. After obtaining both scrolls, proceed to the forest's tower. There is a map at the booths, but you cannot take it with you, so you will have to memorize it as well as the location of the tower, which I will not reveal. Now I need you to sign these liability forms so that your home villages don't sue us if you die during the exam. After signing them, proceed to the booths and turn in your papers with the rest of your team to receive a scroll and the gate to which you will be assigned. Finally, if one of you dies or becomes incapacitated before reaching the tower, you fail the test. As she finished, she began handing out papers to each of the genin, though she had Hinata, the last genin she handed out papers to, hand the rest to Auto Shinobi because Naruto was present. While most of the others thought this was strange, Naruto was relieved because if she had been within arm's reach of him, he would have succumbed to his instincts and attacked her. He signed the paper quickly, shaking his head, before turning to the Sound 3. Okay, you got those kunai I gave you? Naruto could proceed because all 3 nodded in agreement. Good. Now, I doubt you'll need them, but if you find yourself in a situation you can't get out of, throw them to the ground and I'll be there in a flash. Remembering what happened during the morning, all 3 nodded, knowing how quickly he could move after killing the Root Anbu and giving Kin and Zaku the answers during the first exam without anyone noticing. Naruto returned their nods before proceeding to the booth, followed by the others. The proctor, along with Gaara and Yugito, handed over his papers to the proctor, who pulled out a covered scroll to conceal it. Your gate number is 9. Naruto nodded as Gaara and Yugito attempted to find the map in the aforementioned booth, but were unable to do so because Naruto had already begun walking away towards their gate. Yugito grabbed his shoulder and growled lightly at him as Gaara gave him his trademark glare before speaking. We need to look at the map. Naruto smiled as he reached into his pouch and pulled out a rolled-up parchment. Are you referring to this map? Both resisted sweating and failed as Naruto grinned like a certain fox before shaking their heads and sighed. They were standing at the gate, going over the map, after a few moments. Naruto was staring at both Gaara and Yugito before the latter spoke up. That's a bit cruel, you know. I know you don't like it here, but if no one knows where they're going, it's just us. Incorrect. If you haven't noticed, there are 8 booths, which means 8 maps. While the bitch was handing out the papers to sign, I stopped time and grabbed all 8 maps, secretly placing one map in each of the 7 teams I want to pass, which are also some of our targets and will help make the tournament more interesting at the end. Naruto cut in as he rolled up the map and tossed it at Yugito, who stared back. Are you going to tell us which teams got the maps? Are we nosy? Naruto grinned as Yugito glared at him with murderous intent, while Gaara looked semi-amused and pissed, widening Naruto's grin. I suppose I'll tell you too. I obviously gave the other sound team one map. I also gave one to each of the 4 Konoha teams, with our goals written on them. Now, as for the other 2, I gave one to Kabuto's team because we already knew they'd pass. I eventually gave one to the Kusagakure team. Gaara and Yugito both raised their eyebrows at the previous team, with the sand user being the first to openly question him. How come the grass team? The dual breed began to inspect his blades before answering them, lightly shaking his head at both of them. Something odd about the one with 2 different eyes. That one of his eyes can track me while I'm using stop time. Only Kyuubi and Rayne Ka-san can see me while using it, and even she struggles without Beliar's eye. So, given that his eye was following me during the first exam, I believe it is Beliar's other eye. Both of their eyes widened in surprise as he said this, and Yugito spoke quickly. If you're certain it's Beliar's eye, we need to get it out of him right away. Yugito, have you forgotten what happens when you handle one of Beliar's pieces? Naruto interrupted her once more. Yugito flinched lightly because she had witnessed someone handling one before it violently replaced the corresponding part in the handler's body. Naruto gave her a light nod. Now you know we don't have anything to remove it without it taking over one of our eyes. The only saving grace is that the damn things are indestructible, so we don't have to worry about them getting damaged. Yugito rolled out the map and began to examine it before handing it to Gaara, and both nodded lightly. The 3 waited for their gate to open after he finished looking over it and pocketed it. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long because all of the teams were ready to go, albeit slightly irritated at not knowing where the tower was. Hana's voice could be heard over the intercom as everyone finished preparing for the exam's start. Gatekeepers, please open the gates and begin the second exam. The gate slid open as her voice faded, and Naruto walked into the forest, closely followed by Gaara and Yugito. After a few moments, they took to the trees and began hopping from one to the other while Naruto used his aura vision to search for a target. Naruto motioned them closer after a brief look around, pointing out an Omegakure team in the distance. As they got closer, they noticed their umbrellas. Understanding why they were used, the 3 of them looked at each other, trying to stare the other 2 down as they all spoke in unison. I'd like them. Yugito held out her fist, blinking at each other in confusion before shaking it off. Janken. Naruto's lips curved into a smirk as he nodded and held out his fist, thinking he had this in the bag. Sadly, Gaara noticed this and frowned. Without the use of powers. Yugito agreed, causing Naruto to frown and pout. With both of them staring at him, he dropped the act and nodded again, agreeing to the stipulation. Gaara moved his hand forward when he saw him agree, and the 3 went through the motions before announcing their choice. Both Naruto and Yugito frowned at their flat hands as they considered their options, while Gaara had his in the shape of scissors. Gaara shrugged uncaringly, despite the fact that mentally chibi Gaara was giddy. Gaara shook that image out of his head as it was unsuitable for him as he stood up and vanished in a swirl of sand, only to reappear behind the 3 unwitting genin. He wondered if the 3 were genin because they appeared to be a few years older than Yugito. Gaara's sand began to pour from his gourd as the 3 realized someone was behind them and whirled around to face them, only to see the sand Jinchuriki. He held back his irritated growl as the 3 relaxed their guard slightly, not believing he posed a serious enough threat to warrant their full attention. He'd make them pay for it. The leader of the 3 genin stepped forward, flanked by both of his teammates. As they did so, Naruto and Yugito appeared alongside Gaara, flanking him as well because they weren't going to fight. The AIM team looked slightly terrified when they saw the blonde boy who made Naruto smirk, while Gaara frowned even more. Naruto leaned up against a nearby tree and crossed his arms across his chest, looking over at the AIM team. "HN. You don't have to be concerned about me. He is your adversary, not mine. Besides, do you truly believe you are worth my time?" Yugito nodded in agreement as she placed her hand on her hip and grinned at the three, making their annoyance grow even stronger. "I must concur. They don't appear to be worthwhile or time-consuming. They're not even worth Gaara's time, in my opinion. Perhaps we should leave because there will undoubtedly be stronger teams to fight." Gaara was getting irritated by their interference when he noticed the bloodlust and killing intent of the three AIM shinobi approaching. A small smirk appeared on his lips as he noticed their leader grabbing his two umbrellas and twitching his face in rage. Gaara nodded in agreement and was about to turn around when the leader yelled angrily at them. "Never back down on an enemy." With a quick thrust of his arms, Gaara opened his two umbrellas and hurled them into the air with more force than was necessary, while his sand began to swirl around him. When the leader noticed this, his umbrellas began spinning wildly. "Ha! Your feeble sand will not be able to stop this. Die, you cretins." Thousands of senbon descended on Gaara, spinning completely around him as they sought their prey before all of them flew towards him like miniature missiles. On impact, an explosion of sand erupted, covering the area where Gaara was standing. The leader smirked triumphantly as he turned to face Naruto and Yugito, only to find them unfazed and rather bored. His rage grew twofold as he realized they weren't taking him seriously and he began to command his umbrella to rain down his senbon on them. "Is that it?" His eyes widened in horror as he turned quickly back to where Gaara was to see the sand and dust cloud settle down and reveal Gaara unharmed. His blood drained as he noticed an incomplete sphere of sand surrounding the Ichibi vessel, despite his senbon piercing almost every square inch of it and not even making it a centimeter through the inch-thick sand barrier. Not believing what he had seen, he directed his umbrellas to fire every last senbon at him in the hopes of piercing his barrier. In response, Gaara summoned more sand and easily blocked each senbon that flew towards him. As Gaara glared viciously at them, the AIM genin's horror grew exponentially. He already disliked being thought less of, but labeling his sand as feeble went too far. He was proud of his sand and his ability to control it both with and without Shukaku's assistance. He had finally mastered the ability to block attacks subconsciously with his sand on a par with Shukaku, but he still relied on the Tanuki for assistance on occasion, especially when he needed to concentrate on the battle. So disrespecting his sand was directly disrespecting him, and no one ever got away with messing with Sabaku no Gaara. Gaara's sand lashed out at the unsuspecting leader, wrapping around him like a cocoon as he slowly brought one of his hands forward while extending his other arm and catching a falling umbrella. Gaara smirked slightly as he clenched his fist tightly, almost driving his nails into his skin, as if to stop the rain. The AIM genin screamed for a few seconds before the sand crushed his body and his blood shot out in all directions, drenching everything in its path. The ex-AIM nin's teammates screamed and yelled in terror as they tried to flee, but the sand quickly caught up with them and wrapped around them, leaving them with no way out. Gaara cast a cold glance at them as he extended his hand forward again, much to their surprise, when he felt his wrist being gripped and saw Yugito beside him. "Stop, they've had it." Looking into her eyes, he nodded before turning to face Naruto on his right and releasing the two from their sand. Yugito walked forward, grabbed their jackets, and hauled them up after noticing he had released them. "All right, now hand over your scroll." The one in her left hand nodded as he took out the heaven scroll and placed it on the ground. Yugito let them go and picked up as the two scurried away from the area in fear. She tossed it over to Naruto, who pulled out their covered scroll as he hadn't deemed it important enough to look at yet and uncovered it to reveal it was an earth scroll after a brief examination. Naruto looked over to Gaara, nodding lightly as he pocketed them into his pouch. Even for you, that was quite vicious. Keep your controversies to yourself and never attack those who do not need to be attacked. Gaara nodded lightly, having lost control of himself yet again, but had been getting better at it recently. Nodding, Naruto turned to face Yugito before narrowing his eyes and turning to face the bushes as his blades sprang to life. Did we enjoy the show? Before either of them could figure out what Naruto meant, he appeared behind the bushes and swung his arms forward, slamming Kiba and Shino into a tree, their jacket collars caught by the blades. Hinata's eyes had widened as she looked stunned before activating her Byukugan, only to find an arm wrapped tightly around her neck and waist, while sand gripped both of her arms. She mentally cursed herself for allowing the blonde-haired girl to sneak behind her and not noticing the sand around her earlier. Naruto smirked lightly at their fear, then frowned as he noticed the Abarame's bugs trying to crawl onto him. He looked at the two before glaring at Kiba, shaking his head as he had planned ahead of time and applied bug repellent. Mutt, you're lucky I'm not going to kill you right now for what your sister did to me. But I'm not one to kill relatives for vengeance, so consider yourself extremely fortunate. But I will say this, if you try to track me down and murder me as your family wishes, I will kill you without hesitation. And don't think I can't do it as if you weren't aware of the situation. I've got you by the balls. He added the last part to prevent Inuzaku's arrogance from erupting and causing him to say something stupid that would have landed him in hot water. Turning to the Aburame, who was still trying to get his bugs to climb on Naruto and drain his chakra despite the fact that the Kikai would die if they feasted on him due to his vampiric nature, he pressed him against the tree tightly. Aren't you supposed to use logic now? If that's the case, why do you blindly follow your clan when you know they're on the wrong track? Just look at what has happened in the last few years to understand why it isn't very logical. If you ask me, it's extremely stupid, but I'm not an Aburame, so I won't complain. When Naruto continued looking at both of them, they both looked at him in confusion as his words began to sink in. Now that I've got you thinking, I'm going to leave you alone, but first. He grabbed their faces with his blades and smashed their heads into the tree, knocking them out cold. Naruto reached into Kiba's jacket and pulled out a shivering Akamaru as they slid to the ground. He cocked his head at him before lightly growling at him. In response, Akamaru yipped a few times, and Naruto nodded before placing the small dog back on its partner, growling something else. Turning away from the puppy, he focused on the former Hyuga heiress before moving on to Gaara and Yugito. Allow her to go. We have a few issues that need to be addressed. Both nodded, knowing that this had already released her, before seating her on a sand chair made by Gaara. The said Hyuga looked at everyone in confusion, but she knew she wasn't in danger, so she deactivated her Byukugan. Hinata turned to Naruto, cautiously looking at them. What do we need to talk about? We've never met, as far as I know, so if we could get this over with quickly because, unlike you, we still need to get our other scroll. Naruto raised an eyebrow because no one had ever spoken to him like that before, while Gaara snickered and Yugito mouthed touch a copyright. Naruto pretended to be innocent, shaking his head at her tone and attitude toward him. Oh, sweet princess. I assure you that we will not waste your time. And how can you forget about me? We used to play in the park until your father almost killed me for being near you. He said the last part in a sickeningly sweet voice that made everyone in the room cringe. Hinata's eyes widened in recognition as a glimpse of her former self appeared. Naruto mentally smirked as he saw this and liked what he saw even as she spoke weakly. Was that you? But why do you look so different? Her cold exterior abruptly returned as she clenched her fist tightly. So it was my father who made you leave. I should have known that cold-hearted fuck would do something like that. Ha. I'm sure he got it when he forced you out and saw who you are. Naruto let out a soft sigh, which caused Hinata to look up at him, perplexed. Naruto shook his head and looked down at the female Hyuga. You have no idea why or how I was chased out of the village. No, I understand why you were chased out. You were the child into whom the Yondaime sealed Kyuubi, and thus Kyuubi. Hearing this, Naruto narrowed his eyes, annoyed that as soon as he left, they informed the younger generations of his former burden. Hinata continued on before he could respond. If you ask me, it's a load of nonsense. You may have the fox sealed within you, but that does not make you it. If you were Kyuubi, you would have killed any villagers who mistreated you. Anyway, I'm not sure how you were chased out of the village, to answer your second question. Naruto nodded lightly, a light smile crossing his face as he remembered the events of the day Rayne, Kyuubi, and Itachi took him from the village. Naruto looked over at the Hyuga, sighing lightly as he leaned deeper into the tree. It's straightforward. The villagers came close to killing me. They should have succeeded by any means. As Naruto continued, Hinata paled as her old self tried to pry its way back out. I would have died that day if Rayne Ka-san hadn't killed them all, fed me some of her blood to become dhampir, and Kyuubi hadn't turned the rest of my human side demon. To protect me that night, Itachi even killed Anbu and his best friend. They all took me under their wings after they saved me and left the village. When he was done, Hinata was fighting her old self and struggling to keep control. Hinata gritted her teeth and closed her eyes in an attempt to keep herself under control. She then opened her eyes and looked Naruto in the eyes. I see. Under those circumstances, I would leave as well. Screw it. I want to get out of this abandoned village right now. Is it possible for you to bring me along?
Yugito held back her growl as she instinctively felt threatened by the blue-haired girl.
Despite being so close to Naruto, she was starting to understand what Gobi went through on a daily basis. Noticing this, Naruto gave her a light smile before turning to Hinata. We're sorry, but no. Hinata's eyes narrowed and she was about to get up and leave when Naruto continued on. However, I have something far superior. Her interest peaked as she looked expectantly at Naruto, earning her a grin. Otto, you see, intends to attack Konoha, but not to destroy it. Only to free it and restore Konoha to its former glory. Along with Rayne Ka-san, all three Sannin are leading the assault. Hinata's eyes widened as far as they could before returning to normal, a wicked smirk crossing her lips as she looked Naruto in the eyes. How can I assist? Naruto couldn't help but return her smirk as he leaned against the tree and stretched his arms out. All I need you to do is persuade the branch house to join us in our fight. Jiraiya and Orochimaru will remove the cage bird in exchange. Hinata smirked and quickly nodded in agreement, having recently slept in the Hyuga complex's branch house section, which was only a quarter the size of the main branch. When Naruto saw her agree, he offered her his hand to help her up. However, remember to keep this a secret, and only tell those you trust within the branch house so they can spread the word, as they will know who the main branch lapdogs are better than you do. The female Hyuga nodded and took Naruto's hand in hers before standing up and stretching lightly. I will. And I suppose you should be leaving right now. They appear to be about to get up. She pointed to Kiba and Shino, who were indeed stirring. When he saw her, Naruto nodded lightly and handed her a Hiraishin kunai. If you need my assistance, toss that into the ground and I'll come. He, along with Gaara and Yugito, vanished into thin air as Kiba and Shino slowly began to awaken. Hinata could only smirk as she walked over to her two teammates, pocketing the kunai in her pouch. She could finally get back at her father. Naruto sighed as they waited near the tower, picking off any teams that had found themselves there by accident. After a day, not a single team on which he had planted a map had made it to the tower. He couldn't even see any of the teams with his aura vision, which meant they were at least a mile away at best. The only good thing about their wait was that they had collected 5 scrolls, 3 of which were heaven and the other 2 were earth. He honestly had no idea what to do with them all, but it was preferable to allowing teams he didn't want to enter the tower. Shaking his head, he turned to face Yugito's sleeping form and smiled lightly at her. He looked at her for a few moments before realizing what he was doing and turning away with a slight blush as Gaara raised an eyebrow at him. Ignoring the redhead, who was mentally planning on entrapping the two until they admitted they liked each other, Naruto sighed as he looked around the nearby forest with his aura vision.
Except for the teams they had already taken a scroll from, not a single soul was nearby.
In a mediocre attempt to hide his boredom, Naruto snapped his blades back into place and began expecting them once more. Of course, Gaara was well aware of this but chose not to say anything. Although the sand Jinchuriki would never admit it, he enjoyed listening to the sounds of the forest because it soothed him, though not as much as a full moon. Then again, he noticed the blonde was never truly calm unless he was in battle or with Gobi or Yugito. It seemed strange to him, but it made sense because he knew the blonde dual breed's 2 halves were almost always constantly and pointlessly warring with each other. Shaking his head, he was considering building a sand cottage when Naruto jumped up and began scanning the area for something. The redhead was perplexed until he noticed the blonde fingering his pouch and realized that one of the 3 sounds had to have thrown the Hiraishin kunai. Go ahead and do it. While you're gone, I'll keep an eye on Yugito. Naruto nodded in agreement before using stop time and rushing towards the kunai marker as an extremely thin line of black and red light that was almost imperceptible to even the best shinobi. Naruto rushed through the rather large forest, turning left to follow the resonating pulse of the kunai before leaping into a clearing with the sound of 3 badly beaten down. He couldn't blame them, though, because they appeared to have been ambushed by the other 3 Konoha teams. He deactivated stop time and appeared in front of the sound 3, appearing by the kunai that Kin had thrown. Everyone stopped and stared in awe at the blonde-haired dual breed, but none more so than the sound 3. While Kin and Zaku were overjoyed that he came, Dosu was disappointed but refused to let his pride get the best of him because he knew he wasn't a match for 9 skilled genin and knew deep down that the blonde was. Returning his attention to the 3 auto genin, Naruto shook his head before pulling Dosu up and reaching into his pouch to hand him both a heaven and earth scroll. As Naruto turned around and faced the 9 genin, the bandaged sound genin blinked in confusion. Those are the 2 spares we have. Now proceed to the tower. I'll catch up with you in a few minutes. I have some business here. Dosu gave Naruto a brief glance before shaking his head, knowing he could handle the situation as he walked over to Kin and Zaku, helped them up, and began walking towards the tower. Once they were gone, he flipped his blades to rest as he stretched out, not wanting to kill any of them. He slid into his battle-ready stance as soon as he finished stretching, a grin on his lips. Finally, a good workout. I hope none of you disappoint me. I've been waiting for a chance to see what you're capable of, especially you, Uchiha. When he heard Neji snort and step forward, Sasuke narrowed his eyes and slowly slid into the Uchiha's basic stance. He narrowed his eyes even more because he didn't want to be interrupted, but he let him do so because Naruto seemed amused. Do you truly believe you can defeat all of us? You may be the Yondaime's son, but you are nothing in comparison to either us or him. Naruto's sly grin never left his face as he tilted his head towards the branch house prodigy. You're correct, I'm nothing in comparison to Two-san. Neji was taken aback because he hadn't expected Naruto to admit it. Naruto's grin widened even more when he saw this, before his face became deadly serious. I'm stronger than him. Naruto jumped on Neji and landed a somersault kick to his chin, sending the Hyuga prodigy levitating into the air. Naruto flipped in midair and thrust his palm into Neji's chest, sending him flying into the bushes faster than anyone else could see. Naruto's coy grin returned in full force as he returned to his battle-ready stance as the others gradually realized what had happened. "Shall we begin now?" Lee, never one to turn down a challenge, rushed towards Naruto. Naruto quickly ducked beneath him and sweep-kicked him before grabbing his leg and throwing him at Shikamaru, who had attempted to use his clan's special technique on him. The lazy genius didn't have time to dodge and was hit square in the face by Lee. Choji used his Bubanbaiki no Jutsu to leap forward and grab Naruto as Ino went through the hand seals for Shintention. Naruto purposefully let her finish the seals and used his aura vision to track her soul as it approached his. Naruto mentally sighed as he easily broke free of Choji's grip before gripping his elongated arms and using him as a bat to smash the paint tiger charging at him before throwing Choji into the young root Anbu. Turning around, he noticed Ino's soul close by and jumped up to avoid it when a hail of kunai, shuriken, senbon, and other weapons he couldn't name descended from every direction. Tenten had thrown each of them at him and attached wires to them, prompting a small smirk on his lips. Even though the weapons wouldn't hurt him too much, he wasn't going to play along and let her think she could hit him. He vanished in a flash of red and black light as the weapons were about to collide, reappearing directly behind the stunned weapons mistress. She was out of the fight with a quick chop to the neck. Naruto backflipped over the charging Sasuke, causing the Uchiha to stumble before turning around to meet a foot to the face from Naruto. Naruto bent backwards to avoid Lee's fist before grabbing it and slamming the weighted taijutsu user down on top of Sasuke like a hammer. Naruto spun around and backhanded Neji as he reappeared on the battleground, knocking him back. Naruto was about to charge and take him out of the fight when he narrowly avoided a fist that connected with the tree next to him and snapped it like a twig. Back-flipping a few times, Naruto looked mildly surprised that it was Sakura who had thrown the punch before narrowing his eyes because he knew that technique belonged to Tsunade, implying that the council managed to pry the secret of how to use it out of her, or possibly Shizune because the latter was easier to bully around. Before he could think about it any further, he tried to move but was unable to. Looking down, he noticed Shikamaru forming a rat seal and holding him down. He slightly narrowed his eyes at this before noticing Choji using Baika no Jutsu and rolling towards him like a steam truck. Naruto, like Tenten, was not going to be amused as he quickly broke free of Shikamaru's shadow, sending the shadow user stumbling back before bringing his fist back and slamming it into Choji's spinning form. The large shinobi was rocketed back and rammed into the awakening Ino, taking both out of the fight as they slammed into a tree. He quickly spun around and grabbed both Sakura's and Lee's fists before kicking them in the stomachs and using them as platforms to jump over Neji and Sasuke. As he landed behind them, he cut Neji's neck, taking him out of the fight, before throwing Sasuke into a tree, knocking him out. Naruto took a quick look around before reappearing in front of Sai, almost finished painting what appeared to be the Yondaime. He sliced the notebook in half with a quick flip of one of his blades before striking the painter in the face with a well-aimed palm strike, knocking him out. He quickly grabbed a few of Tenten's stray kunai and threw them at Shikamaru, catching him by the clothes and pinning him to a tree. He appeared in front of him quickly and delivered a powerful punch to the gut, knocking the lazy genius out of the fight. He turned around to see Lee and Sakura charging him from opposite directions. Naruto, tired of Sakura's super strength, flashed in front of her and landed 2 palm strikes to her lungs, causing her to double over in pain. She was out like a light with a quick strike to the back of her head, leaving only Lee and Sasuke as combatants. The two didn't appear to be eager to continue fighting because Naruto didn't appear tired and had successfully knocked out the other 7 without taking any damage. Looking at each other, the two nodded as they slid into their stances and awaited Naruto's next move, despite the fact that they had been the aggressors for the majority of the fight. Naruto grinned at this before noticing Sasuke's fully developed Sharingan. He made a mental note to inform Itachi of this before unexpectedly flashing behind the two of them. Naruto had put Lee to sleep with a simple tap on the shoulder before turning to Sasuke. As entertaining as this has been, I'd better get going. Naruto then turned around and began walking away. Sasuke clenched his teeth, not liking the fact that he had been brushed aside like he was nothing, and would have charged Naruto if the said boy had spoken. Your brother, Sasuke, would be proud of you. Hearing this, Sasuke's eyes widened before all the air rushed out of his lungs. His eyes widened as he noticed Naruto removing his fist from his stomach. As he crumpled to the ground, out cold, his eyes rolled into the back of his head and returned to their normal state. Naruto turned around and headed back towards the auto team, where he would lead them to the tower.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.